Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Breakthroughs with Bre. I'm so happy to have you back this week on the show. We're having breakthroughs about our personal and spiritual development journeys, all in living our most abundant and free and authentic and blissful lives that we want to live. My name is Bre. I'm an Akashic Records channeler, energy healer, astrologer, and tarot reader, and I use all those modalities to do my favorite thing, which is one-on-one coaching with people on healing, shadow work, and creating soul alignment, all of which is available on my website at healingwithbre.net if you're interested in working with me. Today, we have a fabulous episode about creating healthy relationships after trauma. I do want to mention there is a trigger warning for this episode. Our wonderful guest is very vulnerable and transparent in her experience with certain kinds of abuse, including just mentioning the fact that there has been sexual abuse. So if that feels like a topic that's really tender or would be very difficult to listen to, by all means, please make whatever choices you got to make to support your own health and happiness. So there is a little bit of a trigger warning around that, even though I will say it does not get um, like detailed or anything. It's just the mention of the fact that there's that trauma and some of the ways that that's affected relationships. So if you have capacity for that, it's an absolutely beautiful conversation. I'm excited for you guys to listen to. Before we get into that, a couple announcements for you all. I have single sessions open in December as well as January to help everybody get the year off on a really strong aligned start. So a couple of ways that I'm helping people do this is one, through my tarot readings. I'm so excited to be doing tarot with you guys. It's very similar to getting a channeled reading, except we're letting the cards help us really like get into the details of the information and the insights that our guides are passing to us. We have the ability to do forecasts with the cards for the year, which I think is so spectacular. If you haven't listened to my December forecast episode, I actually like pull cards, and so you get a little bit of a taster. But if you want to see what big themes 2024 has for you, what energies you can bring in to like really get the most transformation, some blocks or unconscious things that would serve you to become more conscious of, to start to look at some of the timing for some of the big events that you might be looking towards or that you might be considering for your year. Big themes, we can do it by month. Like there's so much we can do to like look into the personal forecast for the year of 2024. If there's certain manifestations you're really trying to create, we can pull so many different kinds of cards and spreads to help you feel really empowered in how you can approach those. I'm also doing that for you little entrepreneurs out there. If you're trying to get more of a business forecast, there's so many fun things we can do with the cards to really tap into the energy that your business would really like to bring through, as well as, of course, how that can be supported, and you can get kind of a synergy on how like your personal energy and your personal development of the year comes in and supports that. So tarot is one big way that I'm helping you guys tap into the guidance of your own higher self, your soul, your guides to make 2024 rock for you. The other thing is I do have Akashic channeling, my Akashic activation sessions available. These are really powerful sessions. They're really energy healings and energy activations. So if you want not only to be able to receive information straight from your guides and your own Akashic records, your soul contracts, you want to hear from your teams, what they feel like is going to be the most powerful and impactful information for you to hear in order to like align to your soul truth and like come into contact with your own authenticity so that you can keep walking your soul path. If you want to hear what that information is from them, of course, sign up for the session, but you're also going to get a lot of energy activations via the session, via hearing that information. You can look at all of the reviews. I have dozens of reviews of people speaking to this so that you can start 2024 on the energy that you want. Then please sign up for that Akashic activation session. And then finally, I do have coaching sessions open if you have like a single topic that you feel like you've been like really struggling with and you want to get a breakthrough on, you want to have some intuitive guidance or some things like really shifted, and you don't know that you are in a place where you want to pull the trigger on like a 3 or 6 months coaching, but you feel like you would really benefit from like a long sit down with somebody to help you work through. I have my one-on-one coaching like single sessions to breakthrough session that are available 90 minutes on my website. More details are about that on Healing with Bre. Go ahead and take a look. I would be happy to help you work through again, like a single topic that you just really feel like you need a little support to like get a breakthrough on. I would love to do that, help you do that. And finally, I am going to be opening up some more coaching spots. those should be available on the website now. So if you've heard me talking about a lot of this transformation work and all of these different episodes, especially this one around relationships, and you are ready to make some really big shifts in your life, you're ready to finally get to the core and heal and transmute and transform some of the biggest blocks or pain points or patterns that you feel like have been preventing you from living out your highest authentic expression from your soul or create some of the things that you want to manifest, I would love to work with you for 3 or 6 months. So check out my website about those things. With all of that being said, I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy that we could do this episode and provide this information for you. So please enjoy this episode. All right, everybody. Today on this podcast, we have the honor of having Miss Jillian Warren on, who is a 200-hour yoga teacher, expansion coach, who is using yoga, meditation, and the fear alchemy process to intuitively help her clients work through and clear whatever is making them small so that they can step into their fullest expression. Welcome to the podcast, Jillian.
Hi, Bre. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's an
I
honor to be
know.
here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to have you. We had so much fun recording that episode of your podcast that we did, Expand the Conversation. So, depending on when this airs, if you guys haven't checked that out, please do, because it's a fabulous conversation. And I could not wait to have you on Breakthroughs with Bre.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about this. Our conversation was so good. And, I know once we get to that point, we'll start sharing about it once it's out.
100%. And I feel like there's just so much like overlap between what you and I do and even our podcast itself that creates like this really fun synergy. So why don't we jump right into it? You know, the kind of stuff I love to ask my guests to like let the audience get to know you a little bit, your big three in astrology, human design, maybe any other like personality tests that you've taken. So give it to us. Tell us about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my big three in astrology, I'm very airy. My sun and rising are both Gemini, and my moon is Aquarius. So lots of emotions there, lots happening all the time in my mind. And it makes sense, like even with my human design, I am a manifesting generator. So I feel like I constantly have my hands in like 8 different projects and I love learning. And so I'm constantly just kind of feeling into what feels good to me in the moment.
Mm,
I'm a 22-4 in numerology. So that master number has been something I've really been looking into and, really finding where I can find balance and creating this foundation as the builder in
mhm,
numerology and learning what that means. And I love it so much because in my archetypes, I'm the lover. So a lot of my mission that I've been learning about here is learning how to express love in its truest form, as well as embody it, which is the biggest part, right? Like it's
mhm,
being able to be angry at someone, but to still love them and to come at like to approach the anger that I may have towards them in a loving way that feels good to me
mhm.
and really learning what that looks like.
I was just going to ask for the numerology. So did you say you're 22-4? Okay,
Yes.
which numbers are which?
So basically, whenever you're a master number in numerology, because basically you're always wanting to get it down to one number, right?
Oh, I get it.
So
The 2 + 2 is 4, but technically you got the 22, which is its own meaning. Okay,
yes,
okay, got it.
exactly. So basically, it's like I embody both the number of the 2 and the 4.
Yeah,
And so I have double 2, and then it also leads into the 4, which is that foundational like building.
yeah,
And the 2 is very much about balance.
yeah. And
So
relationship cooperation 100%. Okay, now I'm tracking you. Thank you for explaining that. And this is so well timed that you said that. And I just dawned on me like why I don't ask people about their numerology because I love it. So that's added to the list now. I'm so happy that you said that. And I just did a podcast. I did a December forecast where I taught people how to calculate their life path number. So like adding together the like all of the digits of their birthday until they get a single one. So like hopefully everybody like we'll be able to like track that and be able to like look into what that means. But that is so cool. And I love that you're a 4. Like 4 is a big number for me, even though technically my life path number is a 5. Um, but like 444 is one of my really big angel numbers that I'll get about being like supported and protected and like we're helping like lay it down, like we're helping keep it steady for you, like keep going, it's good, you know? So I love that. Both the two
Yeah.
and the four energy. I love it.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I started getting into numerology over the last couple of years and kind of learning what that means because growing up, I've always had people tell me like, "Oh, you're meant for something big." And it's like, what does that mean?" Like, what do I do with this? And so then of course to have it come through in my numerology as well, I was like, okay, so I'm basically leaning into it, but also a little bit about my background. So growing up, I've had a lot of childhood trauma, and sexual trauma. My dad was very verbally abusive and emotionally abusive. And so I've caught myself in these patterns at this point in my life and my healing journey where I can see where, because of how my dad was, I am not only getting into relationships with someone who's more likely to abuse me. And abuse is an interesting word because like it varies from person to person, right?
Yeah.
But also then I seek emotional support from my abuser. And this is a deep rooted childhood pattern for me because of what I went through with my dad. He would go into these drunk screaming rages and I couldn't, like, my nervous system would be activated and I would just freeze. And so from that point, like it's becoming more and more obvious to me now, especially ending my past relationship where it's like this person hurts me and then I'm still seeking them for support. And it's like something's got to give here.
Yeah.
But I've just like made a lot of my purpose, with the emitting love and like learning how to embody love and be love and spread love in the world. It's been really interesting to see how to find that balance when you really love someone, because when we love people, we really want to give them everything, right?
Mhm.
And I am very much that person, as the lover archetype. All I want to do is love people. I want to be able to do nice things for them and just show them that I love them, be there for them, support them. But I'm really having to learn like where that balance is. Like, where am I giving too much of myself versus keeping what I need to keep, even though I do have love for that person. Maybe it's not the best time for me to be sharing so much of myself.
100%. And I think I mean, first I want to say, and Jillian and I talked about this a little bit on her podcast. I think that it is so special to everybody else that you are so brave to talk about your backgrounds and how that shows up for you in relationships today and the vulnerability and the transparency of that, because I know you offer that not just to like talk about your own past and what might feel uncomfortable, but you really do it for the sake of how it might resonate with other people and support other people, which I think is really beautiful. But bringing back around to what you said, I feel like so the two, I think is like coming out of like the individual into the connection with other people, give it, hence its relationship thing. So like that sense of like what is connection, what is collaboration, even in astrology, it's like the difference between like the ascendant and the descendant, right? Or like all of this kind of stuff. And kind of like the Aries Libra, like all of that kind of energy. But the four to me, not only is it building the foundation and the framework, but I also feel like as a very earth inspired number, it also has to do a little bit with some of that boundary stuff that I feel like you were alluding to. So I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about how your experience is really starting to like live out some of those themes of you trying to like grapple with and find a healthy balance of connection with people while also taking responsibility for your own foundation and like the boundaries and the things that are required in order to build something that's really healthy for yourself within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been really eye-opening for me. I will say, like, going into this healing journey, man,
Mhm.
it started in like 2020 for me. I never expected my relationship to end. I never expected to be where I'm at right now. And it's really brought up a lot that I've been able to see in the relationship too. So, like, consciously, it makes so much sense, but there's still that part of my ego, right? That it's very codependent. And because, like, I love love and I always have, it's
Mhm.
really hard for me to let love go when I still feel it, or to allow it to change or like grow into something else, because
Mhm.
our ego wants to keep us safe. And for me, that was the safest relationship I had ever been in. But also,
Yeah.
like, I do need to really hone in on my boundaries and like realize where I'm allowing things to happen to me and
Mhm.
allowing myself to get back into a victim mindset instead of saying, hey, this isn't for me, and just moving on.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your story about all of that, Jillian. I'm really excited to continue our conversation. And just a little fun behind the scenes for everybody. Jillian and I were going to talk about one topic, and we started chatting, and I just asked her offline if she would feel comfortable with us kind of like taking a pivot in a different direction, to talk about finding healthy relationships and starting to like redefine love in a healthy way for ourselves after having maybe some unhealthy or like toxic past relationships. And she so graciously said, yeah, let's do it. So I'm really excited for us to continue our conversation about this in the main segment. So let's head right into that. All right, everybody, this is going to be a good one. I can feel it. I can feel it in my bones. Okay, so I just asked the guides where they want us to start with this. And this is what they told me. They said, we want you to start talking about what you were conditioned to believe that love really was. Maybe not even so much in your like individual experience just yet, but just to start with like the younger version of me thought that love was looked like this, like a relationship was this kind of thing. I gave this, they gave me this, like just in general, and then start to go into some of our own like unique and individual like experiences with that so that we can flow into kind of that process of how we learned and how we kind of deconstructed that definition of what it's like, I guess you could say, to start to reconstruct that to be something that felt a little bit healthier for us. Jillian, is that something that you'd like to start off with?
Yeah, absolutely. In growing up in what I call the Disney era, there were a lot of love stories in Disney. And it's so for me growing up, I always was waiting to be saved by a man. And, not to mention with some of my ancestral and familial trauma, it's very much been the women in my family have been like helpless. I was on this retreat in Mexico, and this doctor was giving a massage, and he told me I had trapped emotions in my body that were passed down from my grandmother to my mom. And it's been like this lineage thing. And it was like lack of hope, um, no, like lack of control. And so with that, like I feel like believe or sorry, words. I felt like growing up, love meant someone taking care of me, or love meant someone basically just choosing me, saving me, and was going to come in as my proverbial knight in shining armor.
Mhm.
That is what love was going to look like. And it was going to be this unconditional, magical story. And, you know, based on how I was raised and based on my relationship with my dad, it like what I learned was that someone abuses me, right? Someone mentally abuses me, but this is the person that I'm supposed to receive love from, or that loves me unconditionally. So it became a pattern for me to find love in places that were addicts or people that had anger issues, and thinking that I could come help them and they would love me in return for that, or I was able to go be in this relationship and they would save me, and it was okay that they were treating me in that way, but in reality it wasn't.
That's really, really powerful. Yeah, I think that for my part in it, um like a younger Bre probably would have described what loving relationships were as definitely like a certain element of like exchange happening. I think what I intuited and what I learned from what I saw around me was that you have to, like, the price of loving someone, what it really means to love someone is to kind of like give up everything,
Yeah.
even your own sense of power or your own sense of like autonomy. Like there was a little bit of a like a loss of autonomy in like loving relationships, and to me this even expands outside of romantic relationships even into friendships. I think that there was definitely an air of like codependency for sure, which is where a lot of that comes in. um and like you kind of like have to do everything for everybody. Oh, and the other piece of it too was that to love someone um is to kind of like manage their stuff for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? I grew up in like I've mentioned a lot before, a very religious background, and I think that part of like kind of like giving every single part of yourself was a little bit influenced by that, right? Because you kind of were told what you are and what was good and what was not and what was allowed and what was not, like in that, in my experience with that upbringing. And I grew up with um, parents who themselves had that other dynamics that I just described with each other and with other people too, like where they had a hard time and still do, like kind of taking responsibility for their own experience. And that really, what that does is that sets it up to where they need other people to do it for them. And there was definitely like indignation or anger if people that they considered close to them were not stepping in to be supportive in that way that they thought, that they were conditioned, that they were taught, meant it was like it didn't step in the way that they believed was loving. Like this is what a close relationship means, is that you come in and save the day when I'm having a moment. And and that there's a lot of a lot of blurred lines, if any at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if any at all is so true. And, you know, in my experience, it's definitely been, I give a lot of myself away. And, you know, not even really stepping into my own autonomy until this year, you know, and being able to say, like, no, I need to take this time for myself. And it's been a really interesting situation, like, because I'm so open to love and the way the universe works. And, you know, what's that saying? It's if you love someone, let them go.
Hmm.
And if it's meant to be, they'll come back. Right.
Yeah.
And so even in ending this relationship, I had the mindset of like, you know what, maybe he just needs to see that I'm being serious, because if I'm asking him to change these things for me, how is he ever going to know that I really mean it if I'm just sitting there still, you know, and I'm not making the
Yeah.
change myself in the relationship? So I
Hmm.
did that. And then after doing that, he did not change and is just, you know, looking to soothe himself, which is, you know, his choice. And it's also allowed me to see, like, ultimately we can't control people, right? And ultimately in relationships, you're still going to have your partner that's going to make your own decisions because they're their own human, and
Hmm.
that's okay. It's just honestly seeing where they can make decisions that are right for the both of you instead of just for themselves. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you know, sometimes it gets to the point in relationships where you do have to choose yourself. And it's something that you do have to continuously choose yourself throughout your life, throughout friendships, romantic relationships, any kind of people interactions,
Yeah.
because no one's going to choose you. And I don't mean that in like, you're never going to have support, but I mean it in the way of like the way that we can choose ourselves so deeply and have such a deep core of self love and autonomy, and
Hmm.
know that we're exactly where we need to be and good enough exactly where we are, is basically like something no one else can ever give you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I talk a lot with some of my coaching clients, um, like really teasing apart that idea that once we're adults, these things that we imagine that we need from other people or an external environment is really just something that we need to give ourselves. And until we see that and until we try that on and like really feel that those like deep cravings that we have are only things we can ever give ourselves, like we're always going to be in a state of like looking and searching externally, and we're always going to feel that sort of like discomfort or that like squirreliness of like, oh, I just need it, please give it to me, but like really, like we got, like we got to give it to ourselves. um Another like relationship story that's coming to mind too, that was one of mine, and I feel like you'll probably relate to, and I identified this even through the language of my Pisces moon, is that through growing up with people who did love me and were also responsible for my like literal care when I was dependent on other people for that, which we all are when we're young, right? But who didn't always like act in a way that was consistent with like capital L mature healthy love. I think what that forced me to do was to sort of like you're forced to reconcile that in some way, and everybody reconciles that in a different way, right? But for me, it felt like what I had to do was I had to see the good in people, and that had to somehow be separate from the actions and the choices that they made that didn't feel like it was in alignment with like the best parts or the most loving parts of them. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
like I feel like what made it more difficult when I would go into adult relationships, and again, this could be friendships, this could be like a lot of other things, like I could see the good in people, I could see their heart, I could see like the core, and I believed in that. And it was kind of an old strategy. It was an old pattern when that became the excuse for choices and behavior that was not loving or was not supportive or did not reflect that, you know? And one of the like biggest things that sort of gave me a breakthrough for that was to realize that that's not really love what I was doing. Like to only see the part of them that I liked or that I labeled as good, or that was only really just like one part of them, and to not really like accept, like actually accept like the fullness of who they are for the other actions that they were taking, because those are part of them too. Like especially consistent choices and consistent action, like that's part of them too. And it's kind of even more important because that's what they're choosing to act on. Like that's what they're embodying, like that's what they're creating in this life. For me to like somehow like credit that or like put that to the side or like not take that into account was not really accepting and loving somebody for like the wholeness of who they are. um when, and again, I feel like it was kind of like just through necessity for a long time, had to make it make sense. And it wasn't until I started to get older that I realized that that doesn't really serve anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting that you brought that up because that's something that I'm really good at is I call it falling in love with their potential, right? Like I can see who it's so interesting because I never understood this until this relationship. And it's like I can see who they really want to be or like who they could be if they started to embody their soul, right? And
Mhm.
if they started making these choices for themselves. And so, in this relationship, there were a lot of promises or like a lot of things that he said he would do. And so it's like, it's hard not to fall in love with people's ideas, right? And I know and I believe that he could totally do those things, but it's up to him to make those choices. It ultimately wasn't up to me to be his masculine to be able to make him make those decisions because he was making choices every single day. And it was to not do the things that he said he would do or
Yeah.
follow through in that. And so, I think it's really important in finding relationships whenever you're with people, it's definitely where you're going to find where your boundaries need to be because I can fall in love with someone's potential, but it's like, okay, in this moment, I had to stop myself and say, but what is he actually doing?
Mhm.
Is he actually making decisions that will help him reach that potential? No. So then I'm basically in love with an idea of a person that's not real.
Mhm.
And that he's not willing to be because he's told me he's not. And
Yeah.
so why am I going to stay in a relationship and keep myself small to try
Mhm.
and fit into that box that he wants me to stay in?
Mhm.
And it even in friendships, I this year's been a lot. I actually separated from a friendship group. We had become really close over the last 4 years, but, one of the people in there had told me that they were cheating on their spouse. I ended up becoming really close friends with their spouse, and it was like eating me alive. And so, in constant asking of like, hey, don't talk to me about this, or hey, you should really probably stop. Definitely don't talk to me about it. Like, I can't be included in this anymore. They didn't listen. And so it got to the point where I just basically had to say, sorry, I can't do this anymore. And,
Mhm.
the way it all happened wasn't perfect. People got hurt, but it was what I needed. I couldn't stay in that cage anymore. And I think in finding healthy relationships and healthy love, you're always wanting to find people that are going to let you out of that cage. They're not going to try and keep you small or keep you from being or expressing yourself for who you truly are, but
Mm.
they're going to love you for who you truly are, where you're at, and in making those decisions, which goes back to you saying, like, you have to be able to love people where they're at. And so for me, like, could I have stayed in my past relationship? Absolutely. I've seen that timeline. But the thing is that it wasn't where I wanted to go. It wasn't where my soul wanted to go, because for me on this planet in this lifetime, I meant to do a lot of big things, and that relationship was not going to help me grow anymore. I was basically had like reached my limit of expansion. And so I had that, like, I had to make those choices this year to be able to get out of that friendship, out of my romantic relationship, to be able to continue to express myself for who I truly am.
Mm. I feel that I relate to this because I had a couple friendships that had been very close friendships for a long time that changed a lot this year. So I'm like I'm in that in that vein with you. And I feel like one of the things that gets perpetuated out in the world is that like there's only one way to love somebody, and that's when you are like staying attached to them, never upsetting them, always giving them access to you, and like sort of like, mm, again, sort of like martyring your own self to like leave them kind of untouched. Like that's the only way to love people. And I think what I realized was that like I could still be loving to people and make choices that they didn't understand. Or like I could still love people and like let relationships go. You know, like I feel like a lot of people think, especially that end up falling into some of these like people pleaser patterns that we're really alluding to, right? That we were conditioned with. And they think it's people pleasing or selfishness. Like it's this very binary, like either you're being selfish and you're not being loving, or you're being codependent and martyring yourself and people pleasing, and that is loving. Like, you know, so you have to choose, are you going to be loving or are you going to be selfish, you know? And I think that as soon as you become aware that that's kind of like the structure that you're like assuming all of your choices or behaviors fall into in relationships, I think that that already gives this big like, whoa, like that's not true. Of course that's not true, right? And I think that it also um I think that it kind of exposes the bullshit, frankly, of the justification that our ego will give about why we stay in dynamics that don't feel good to us. You know, like we say that we are because we don't want to hurt them or that that's not loving to them. But I don't really think that's true. I think a lot of times we're just uncomfortable and we just don't know how to withstand the discomfort of somebody else maybe misunderstanding us or judging us or being upset with us, even when we know that we're doing what we're doing out of love for ourselves and for them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought that up, because perspectives are huge. And, my ex and I, we are still in touch because of my son. And it's really interesting because we were talking about our perspectives about how the relationship ended, right? And his is completely different than mine. Like for me, it was very much like, hey, this is what I need from you. I'm growing spiritually, emotionally, like I'm healing all of this trauma. I need these patterns to end. This is what I need from you. But for him, he sees it as, well, you got too into the spiritual, and I know I pushed you there because I wanted you to be able to heal your trauma, but I was hoping you could still stay on the side of science instead of going off into what he would call la la land. And so it's like, to see that perspective, like I really had to just swallow it and be like, that is completely wrong. Like in my mind, I want to be like, no, that's not what happened. But at this point, it doesn't benefit he or I to continue to show up and fight that battle, because that's his perspective. He's already decided that's what's happened. And, so he may say whatever he says to whoever, and I have to be okay with it. And same with, the friendship ending that I was talking about, because I looked like the bad guy to a lot of people. You know, out of that friend group, I still have two very good friends that have had my back this entire time. And it's really been beautiful for me to see how much support I got from that friendship when I really thought I was going to lose everyone. And it was so interesting because they know I'm not the bad guy. And they know that I just had to do this to let myself free of this cage that I was trapped in instead of continuously like playing into this game of, oh, this person isn't happy in their relationship, so they're cheating, and I can just turn a blind eye, or I can say something about it and like the truth needs to be told anyway. I think really for me, the truth is love. And I think people get so stuck in worrying about hurting other people that they forget that the truth is love. Sometimes people don't like to hear the truth. There are gentler ways to deliver the truth, right?
Mhm.
But the truth is essentially love. And so we need to start embodying that more and more to be able to find the relationships we want. Because even, you know, I was joking about dating apps the other day, and I was like, I'm like putting it all out there. Like, I'm spiritual. I talk to my guides. I meditate a lot. Like, I like to be in nature all the time. And they're either going to love me for it or they're going to hate me for it. I love crystals. Like, I just am who I am.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't benefit me or the other person to show up as someone that's not me, because then they're just going to realize that, oh, it's not a good fit anyway.
Mhm.
And so it's really interesting to see that playing out for my ex, because his shadow, his demons that he isn't willing to integrate into his life or like accept himself for what that is, he's still going to bring that into another relationship regardless, because that's just how we act. That's how we operate.
Mm.
And it's really it's really interesting because putting yourself out there is scary. Finding relationships is scary, but that's where dealing with things like nervous system regulation, because even like ending my relationship, like I've learned a lot about how codependent I really am and how uncomfortable this is. This is the first breakup that I've ever been through where I haven't been dating actively throughout the breakup, as well as I haven't already had someone waiting for me. And so my ego has been like loud and a lot, because it's my ego's like, how are we going to take care of ourselves? Go back to the Disney princess. There's no one here to take care of you. So
Mhm.
now what are you going to do? But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that I don't have love from other people, from friends, from my child, like, or from myself.
Yeah.
And so really sitting with that and being able to see the pattern that I'm ending, I think is way more powerful and way more empowering than just sitting in the heartbreak and being like, oh, woe is me. This is so sad.
Yeah. Well, I just want to shout out too for any of the listeners who have not caught the victim consciousness episode that I did with trauma therapist Megan Zuzevich. I highly recommend you go back and listen to it because a lot of the themes of what we're talking about in this episode are connected to that. We go all into like the victim triangle where there's a villain, there's a hero, and there's the victim. And if you find yourself saying language like, they're the bad guy or this or that, or like somebody's coming in and there's some circumstance that's saving the day, or that you yourself are powerless to some kind of scenario, like those are all signals that you are that you're bringing to life some victim consciousness, even in your own perspective. And it can be really empowering to realize when that's happening so that you can kind of step outside of that and be like, okay, like what's really going on? So I highly recommend if people want like a deep dive to listen to that episode because it's brilliant. Um, but to come back to what you were saying, I think that it's really beautiful um, that ultimately we really do have the power to make really, really, really big changes in the dynamics within ourselves and with other people, right? Because really, relationships are just a reflection, a mirror of our own relationship with ourselves, which is like a really trippy thing to think about. Because I have a lot of friends and I've heard a lot of people talk about how growing up in really volatile and abusive dynamics makes navigating relationships really fucking hard. It makes it so hard. Like the intensity of the response from your body in those moments can make it almost feel like a mountain you can't climb
Mm,
to experience something different, right? And I think you putting your story out there about exactly how you've taken like step by step by step to not only be really honest with yourself and be aware about like what had really happened in the past or what's really happening now, but you also taking the power into your own hands to use the tools and the knowledge that you have to be able to like create change within yourself and in your body is so badass and also like really inspirational because I think it can be really hard when there is a lot of trauma, especially like capital T traumas involved, for people to feel like there's hope for them to be able to actually like cross that bridge and get to the place where relationships feel easier and they feel healthier and they feel open and they feel positive. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, absolutely. With traumas, it's such a body experience that, you really it feels like you can't do anything about it, and in ending the relationship and everything I was in, he has his own like anger issues. And that was something that, like, in dealing with my dad, I don't handle well. Right. So he would get angry about something. I would immediately be activated. My sympathetic nervous system would come on. So my fight or flight is full blowing. I'm either going to freeze or fight. Right. So, or flee. And so generally what that looked like is I would be crying and I would go hide somewhere in the
Hmm.
house to be away from him.
Hmm.
Or if I couldn't go away, then I would start screaming and I would start fighting back. And I don't like that I do that. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
don't like that response. And I can see it afterwards. And I'm like, man, and this is where mindfulness comes in, right? Like, you see yourself react to something, you can stop, say, hey, I could have done better. I really apologize, and really meaning it instead of just saying, oh, well, that's just who I am, and doing that and learning to activate your vagus nerve. So basically, like, your vagus nerve is your key to your parasympathetic nervous system, right? So it's going to activate your rest and digest. It's the longest nerve in your body. It connects your brain into your digestive system. So with that, you can do things like singing, humming, deep belly breaths really works, lots of them. You can scream, movement, all of these things can activate your vagus nerve. That way you're going back into rest and digest after you've been triggered, especially in scenarios with like sexual trauma, because it's like it makes it really hard to open up to people after a scenario like that, or you'll be stuck in a pattern of hypersexuality, which happened to me when I was in my early 20s, because I was like, the only way I can receive love is through this, right? So when I was younger, my brother had molested me. And so to go through that, so I've got my dad who's a screamer, and then I've got my brother who sexually molested me. And so it's like, for me, I was like, okay, love is either they're going to yell at me and I have to be okay with it, or I have to make sure that they don't yell, right? Or I have to make sure that I'm sexual. That way people love me.
Mm.
And so I was stuck in this pattern in my early 20s for so long of just like giving myself physically, but not receiving the love that I wanted, because let's just be real, that's not love. But for
Yeah.
me, it's very much been a sign of, oh, they love me. And so reshaping that for myself and seeing that it's okay to be in a relationship that's not sexually active at the time, or going at my own pace, moving into relationships and opening up when I feel ready instead of feeling like I need to like hold on to that person. So, with you, it's it's really hard with trauma because it really takes a lot of like time and learning, and it takes the braveness of being able to look at your past and see it for not good or bad, but just to see it for what it is and see what's happening.
Hmm.
And I mean, even to this day, like, moving out of the house, that's stressful. So, at one point my ex and I were going at it, and at the end of it, I was like, look, I'm sorry I talked to you like that, but I want you to see my perspective of it. This is what triggered it. And so in a healthy relationship, you should be able to have that communication where you're like, hey, this really triggered me. Like, be aware of how you reacted. Let them know that you're working on it and that you want better, but also counting on them and then holding them accountable for not breaking that boundary again. Because if you're allowing them to break that boundary constantly, or if you're breaking your own boundaries constantly, then it's not going to work at all because it's just going to keep you in that same pattern.
Yeah, at that point, it's not a boundary, it's a plea and an attempt at controlling them. It's not really a boundary.
Yeah, exactly. And when you talked about the victim mindset, when you brought up your other episode, it's really true how like being a victim in trauma, it's really easy to get stuck in that, like, oh, you're the evil person, I'm the good person, or I'm the victim, you're the good person that saved me, right? It's really easy to
Mhm.
get stuck in that. And
Mhm.
it was so interesting because, over the Thanksgiving holiday, there was just a lot of emotions coming up for me. And at one point, like, I had this vision of myself as I was in meditation, and I was just this like broken version of myself and just like crying and crying. And like, it was almost like I was like pleading to my ex in this vision, right? And just like begging him to like step up or to save me. And it's like, I don't want to be that person because that's not who I am. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not this small, broken human. I am a whole human who is healing her trauma. So I'm able to move forward and have healthier relationships, and to be able to see that and acknowledge myself where I get stuck in those patterns, because it's that same like, you know even so, it's the same as like if he and I were to get into an argument as we were moving, right? Like if I seek approval from him or comfort from him after he had said something hurtful to me, or after he crossed a boundary, it's just keeping me in that pattern instead of going, you know what? I'm just going to take myself out of the situation and leaving, and not allowing that like hug, sorry, or whatever it is that my ego wants to hear. But in reality, it's not benefiting anyone.
Mm. I think that's so powerful. And what happens a lot, and even just like what's coming up, and I feel like the guides want me to mention, is that a really important part of sort of updating the definition of healthy relationships, because that's really what we're talking about, right? Like we're always evolving our understanding of ourselves and the world. And when we feel our attention on relationships and wanting them to feel a little different or look a little different, or maybe even have ones that are not what we currently have, like we have to evaluate, we have to contemplate, like what is the current state, you know? And part of that is understanding the associations that we made with what love is in those formative relationships. And I have a lot of people close to me who have experienced a lot of sexual trauma. And I think one of the most difficult parts about that experience is that there's this association with love and violation, like violation of it all, of any kind of boundary. Like it's like complete access, right? And just
Yeah.
one of the most devastating ways, you know? And I think that that's like a really hard pattern to go into the world with, because then it's like you have to like the people pushing past what you want, pushing past what you're comfortable with, and you not being able to like sort of hold the line and still receive love is a really difficult dynamic to be in moving forward. And of course, we can learn that same dynamic in other kinds of traumas that don't necessarily involve that same dynamic, but like with that particular kind of trauma, I've just found that that's especially true, you know? And like even all the stuff that you were talking about, you know, um how you managed your own sexual health, like our responsibility over our sexual health and our sexual decisions is like a very certain kind of personal responsibility. And I'll tell you what, if you have some behaviors in that category that don't feel good, like those are ones to really look at, because those are really big indications of self-worth and of self responsibility and self-empowerment, as well as just our feeling about love in general. So I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that. But yes, as like we're moving forward to wanting to create more healthy relationships, like we have to look at like what did we associate with love, you know? Because really, to our subconscious mind, who's the one that's triggering our nervous system to go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like all of these stress responses, love is safety. Love is safety, and your body just wants to keep you safe. So
Hmm.
if you come into situations and you're sensing that you're not going to get, or that you're in danger of not getting a certain kind of love that you feel like is the safe zone, like your body's going to push you right into those patterns and right into that stress response because if you don't get that, you're not safe, right? So I think that it's just so brilliant that you brought all of that together and mentioning some of that nervous system's regulation stuff because I feel deeply that like learning the mechanics of the way that your nervous system works, the way that it affects you physiologically and therefore mentally and emotionally, and learning the tools to start to create safety in your own body, like within your own selves. Like that is one of the biggest ways to take back your own power and to create meaningful change in your life. So, if you want, especially with relationships, which is one of the biggest places of safety that we have as humans, it's like a part of the experience. Like, if you want to start making shifts as you're doing all this personal development work, you're reflecting on those formative relationships, you're reflecting on those stories, you're trying to update those stories, you're trying to disrupt old patterns to create new ones with your choices. Like you really holding on to nervous system regulation techniques can help you overcome even some of the most intense traumas. Like there is still a hope, 100% for you to like really meaningfully and deeply heal and release and transmute like energies that feel very painful into futures that feel really light and loving and positive and supportive.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when you talk about love as safety, like that's why ideally where we find love after, we learn from our parents, it's within ourselves because ultimately I can only control me, right? Like I can only control the things that I do. And so when I can train myself and my nervous system to not only trust myself and know that I'm going to make the right decisions, because that's a huge part in trauma as well, like
Mhm.
especially with sexual trauma, because I like one of the things that had happened to me when I was older, it's like I knew I was saying no. Like, could I have pushed harder? Yeah, but like I gave up. And so it's like learning that I can stand up for myself and learning that I know that I'm never going to let that happen to me again. Now, does that mean that like I can fight a 250-pound man? No, but I can do everything at my own that I can control
Yeah.
to be able to make sure that I'm safe. And, the more that we show our bodies that, and the more we show ourselves that safety, and
Hmm.
the more that we can be grounded in our body as well, the more you learn to listen and learn to see when something feels wrong. And
Yeah.
again, that's learning to trust yourself. And so you can really use that to your advantage as you're trying to like heal these traumas, because especially in sexual trauma, like it just cuts you off at the head. And so your body is almost non-existent because it feels so unsafe there because of the
Yeah.
trauma that happened.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have to get back in your body and you have to process those emotions before you can move into another relationship. Otherwise, you're just going to constantly play into that subconscious circle
Yeah. Of
of,
disassociation and intellectualizing and all the things that helped you survive that trauma in the moment,
mhm.
but ultimately keep you locked into old and unhealthy patterns as it continues moving forward.
Yeah. And, because of traumas that happened to us, we really want to take on control so bad. Like, I spent so much time in my disempowered masculine because I was trying to control everything because I felt like that was the only way I could be safe.
Mhm.
And so it's like learning to be, and it's learning to be okay to be in your feminine and learning to know that when you're flowing with something, or even though I'm going to use the ocean as an example, even though the waves are moving around you and you can't control it, knowing that you're still safe and knowing that you are still okay, even though you don't know the outcome of what's going to happen. Because we get into this like future projecting mode where it's like, oh, well, if I do this, this is going to happen. But like, we never know. The
Mhm.
universe can surprise us and it could bring more beautiful things. Maybe something that you didn't expect happens that's maybe not favorable, but you're
Mhm.
able to at least be in your body and be in the experience, which I feel like is the most important, because when you're in your body, you're able to listen to your intuition more. You're able to see how you're feeling about the situation. And, even for me in my human design, I'm an emotional authority. So I have to listen to my emotions. Like it's
Mhm.
something that I count on. I count on my body to show me what feels good and what doesn't. So
Yeah.
learning that about yourself and learning what feels good to you, as well as like when to put up your boundaries, I think is so important.
Hmm.
That way you can heal and start looking for a healthy relationship. And, you know, I will say that when healing trauma while you're in a relationship, I I don't want to say I don't recommend it, but like, I mean, it's hard because you're counting on your partner to basically watch you go through all of these heartbreaking emotions and watch all of these emotions come out of you, and it looks like you're not okay, and it looks like you're breaking. But in reality, it's liberating and it's freeing to be able to let these shackles go that have been keeping you small, that have been keeping you in this circle. That way you can break out of it and you can move forward with your life. And so sometimes when you go into this healing trauma work while you're in a relationship, it's hard to say that the relationship's going to be the same on the other side. You know,
Hmm.
it could end up being better than you expected, or
Hmm.
it could end up being, you know, like my situation where it's like, well, you didn't
Yeah.
come to play. You wanted me to go play the game, but you didn't want to go.
Yeah. No, that's real. I think what's so funny is that I was in a very long-term relationship when I was younger, through high school and the beginning of college. And like we broke up, and that sparked one of my like really big like personal development, like a younger personal development, not so much spiritual, but this kind of like wait, okay, who am I? And like, like there was like a first version of that, right? And I remember my ex being like why couldn't you have just like done those changes while we were in the relationship? And I was like, I can't explain it to you, but like I just couldn't have. Like it had to have been like when it was just me, and there just was something about it, like me being in my own space and like it just being about me, that I finally was able to even contemplate that idea. And I will say I was really young too. Like we started dating when I was freaking 16. So when would I have ever had time before then to figure that out, you know? But in contrast with my husband, I've gone through my biggest healing. All of my entire spiritual awakening has happened in my relationship with my husband. And there were definitely moments where I was afraid about like going another level into my spirituality because I was afraid I was going to leave him behind, or he wasn't going to be able to keep up, or like it would change our relationship. But I just knew I had to, like, it was so important. I had to take that risk. And it turned out beautifully. Like, our relationship is deeper and more beautiful and more wonderful. And having his support, because he's a really healthy partner, like, benefited my journey, you know? So, like, it can
Hmm.
go either way, but I totally agree with you that, like, you stay committed to your journey and it's going to work out however it's meant to work out. Like, your journey is the most important part of your own experience. And the other thing that you were saying that I feel like is a really beautiful note to leave this on is you talking about self-trust, because I feel like coming back into your power and healing, so that you can attract healthy relationships. Because again, of course, relationships are just a mirror for your own relationship with yourself. But like knowing that when people start to act a fool, like you're going to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe, like that is self-trust to me, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and it requires you I love what you said. It requires you being in touch with your body, because your emotions and your intuition communicate to you through your body. And I'm of the belief that my intuition is always going to guide me to the places that I need to be. And really, especially when I'm like really following my authenticity and all of that kind of stuff, it's going to keep me safe. But like if I'm never listening to my intuition, if I'm staying disconnected from my body, like of course I can't trust that because I'm not connected to it in the first place. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like being able to like come back into a healthy relationship with my body, like get more somatically connected and come out of some of that disassociation or intellectualizing, being able to do that in a safe way, regulating my nervous system, and then being able to like notice and little by little, like just gain awareness for the fact that, like, wait a minute, this person acts and speaks in a way that does not really match the kind of energy I want in my life. Like, even if they're not even doing something necessarily to me, like, do I really like the energy of this kind of thing? Like, is this really what I'm trying to create in my life? Right? Like, does that feel good to me? My body's telling me no. Self-trust is being able to trust that you're acting in your own best interest, right? And I
Hmm.
also deeply believe that when we follow what we know is good for us from that really loving, authentic place that honors what's best for other people, even if we don't understand how. Right. So, like, being able to notice those things, or like, again, if you're in an interaction with somebody and, like you said, like you notice that something does not feel good, and like trusting yourself to give yourself safety,
Yeah.
whatever that means. And then past that, to give yourself joy and to give yourself love. Like, you have to give that to yourself based on the choices that you make in dynamics with yourself and with other people. And that's what you step towards and what you step away from, and how you handle yourself in the spaces where maybe you invite people to come with you, or you're giving them the choice to show you if you're going away or if you're coming with. You know what I mean? So I feel like developing that muscle to act in your own best interest, which is not selfish. Again, coming back to what I said earlier, it's not people please or selfish. That's just not true. It's not true. It's not selfish for you to know what is genuinely best for your own health and happiness, and to act from that place in love. That is also loving for other people, you know?
Yeah. And I love that you talked about like the gray area that exists between people pleasing and selfishness, because for me it's like this year I'm in a personal year too for numerology, right? So all about balance and relationships, and man, did it shake my world up, not in a way that I expected. But it's so interesting because it feels like to me and to everyone else that I'm being super selfish, because I was very much on the people pleaser end of things. I
Hmm.
mean, I was slowly inching away from it, right? But then this
Yeah.
year it's been this like, nope, we're going into the middle. And so people are looking at me going, oh, well, that's really selfish. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine for you to think that, but I know that it's not, because I know that I'm the only one who knows how much of myself I was giving away before, how much
Yeah.
I was saying yes to things that I really wanted to say no to, how much I was molding myself to fit into different frames for people. That way they would like me better, or that way I
They
would
wouldn't
feel
reject
safe.
me, or mhm.
Yeah. And I would feel safe and I wouldn't have to worry about losing that love. When in reality, that's not love at all. Their love for me
Mm.
wasn't real because they didn't really know me. And
Yeah.
then when they did start to see like the choices I was making for myself, and, that I didn't want to go hang out at bars, or I didn't want to go do certain things that they wanted to do, that they really were like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, you don't like me very much, do you? Cool. Well, I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah, no, it can be really powerful. And yeah, I think the last thing we'll probably leave people with too is what Jillian has demonstrated beautifully, and how she talks about her story is like your ability to be really honest with yourself
Yeah.
about what these relationships really are. There was a lot of stuff that happened with all kinds, honestly, every single relationship this year. Um, Family, friendships, even my marriage, where I like had to look at things and be like, okay, like what is really happening? Like if I was like another person looking at this dynamic, this person does this and then this person does this and this person treats this person like this and this person treats that like if you like kind of like step away from it for a minute, which your Aquarius probably gives you like a great thing to do because that's like a strength of an Aquarius, like being able to like step back and just look at it kind of clinically, like is that something that really works? Like is it really a loving relationship, or is it transactional? Is it really supportive, or is it manipulative?
Hmm.
Like is it really that this person not only has the interest, but also has the skills and the capacity to love you in a healthy way? Like when you honestly look at it, is that what is happening?
Yeah.
And if that's not what's happening, like what is happening then? Like your ability to just take like a really honest inventory, and then that gives you the information that you need to navigate like whatever would be most authentic and good for you moving forward, because you're building self-trust to act in the way that is in alignment with what's most authentic and what's good for you and what will create the kind of feelings you want to feel in your life, which is probably safety, it's probably peace, it's probably love, it's probably happiness, right? Like all these things that our just souls naturally aligned to, you know? So there's hope after all
Yeah.
kinds of trauma.
Yeah.
You have the power to create healthy relationships. You can start to build more self-trust so that you know how to navigate situations and like literally be the one co-creating with the universe what those new dynamics look like. especially when you start with just being real honest with yourself.
Yeah. And it's honestly like, it's a practice because, and it goes into a lot of the shadow work, that's really important because it's really allowing yourself to see maybe when you're not being your most favorite version of yourself, but it's still a part of you. You still have this, whether it's a coping mechanism or whatever. But when you can look at it from, okay, where am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why is it happening? Then it's really beautiful to see how you can incorporate that into your life or how you can still love yourself through that. And I love what you said about like giving it perspective because it's nice to see it and detach from it in that way, but it's also really important to remember how you feel even as you're watching it play out and how what's going to make you feel good and what's not without like going, oh, but they were going through this. Like you don't have to make excuses for other people for their actions. Just see the action for what it is. And, whether that relationship is meant to stay or not, then it is what it is.
Thank you so much, Jillian, for coming on the episode today and for sharing so much of yourself and your story. I know that it's going to be really impactful to not only my listeners, but it's going to be continuing to impact the people you work with and from your podcast. If people want to stay connected with you and all of that kind of good stuff, how can they do that? Tell us where people can find you.
So they can find me on Instagram. My handle is at _Jillian_Warren_. And that's generally where I hang out is Instagram. I show up on my stories and just, do crazy things there, but share lots of emotions there. And other than that, I've got a program releasing in January. It's Mastering Meditation. It's a 30-day, like, I don't intro-ish to meditation, but we'll talk about all different kinds of meditations. It's going to include 30 guided meditations within that program. It's going to be super special, and it's a great way to begin to connect to yourself and begin to feel safe in your body and really just show you how to be. I am also hosting a retreat in Costa Rica in April of 2024. It's going to be such an amazing time. I am co-hosting it with a friend of mine, and we're going to be going to the indigenous communities out there, participating in cacao ceremonies, visiting the shaman, and doing so much deep inner healing, as well as going into nature. And it's going to be so magical.
Oh my God, both things sound absolutely spectacular. I'm so excited for you. I can't wait to hear how both of those go. If I wasn't already going to be traveling around that springtime, I'd be like, where do I sign up? Because I just love that kind of thing. And then, as you guys all know, for me, you can find me healingwithbre.net. You can find me at Healing with Bre on Instagram. Please follow the podcast Instagram too, which is at Breakthroughs with Bre. Any sessions where you can do single sessions with me will be on my website, and any long-term coaching will also be available on the website for me as well. And you will be able to find in the show notes all of the ways that you can stay connected with Jillian, like she mentioned. I hope everybody has a beautiful week, and I'll see you next Monday for more breakthroughs.